Hello, good afternoon. My name is Bruno Diniz. Can you hear me? Okay, so the objective of this panel is to talk about the future of means of payment or payment terms. We just would like to talk about we've got different innovations, but recently the PICs that started in 2020. So the exercise here, besides we talk about the key news, we will also focus on 2025, right? The future. 2 years and a half. So I would like to thank you for being here, and I'd like you to please introduce yourselves so then we can start. Rodrigo, please tell us about the organization you represent. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'm just going to remove my headset here. So my name is Rodrigo. I am responsible for the e-commerce at Bauducco and also digital sales. And I've been on the market for 20 years of experience, and I've been involved with this topic: means of payment, safety data, LPD, e-commerce, and digitalization itself. Thank you. Hello. I am a general manager for Latin America. Newspayer is a payment method, and our focus is in the credit in different countries, Latin America. And I've been working with means of payment. But I'm very interested to talk about the market changes because it has been changing a lot 2 years in the period of 2 years in the industry. So I'm very content to be here and talk about the all the changes. So my name is Canabarro. I am one of the founders, and that this group has been acquired by Vista and is one of the largest credit organizations in Brazil. Credit collection, and it's very traditional for e-commerce means of payment. So, okay, what I would like to say here before we look forward, and I will have some specific questions looking for the future, I would like to talk about the advances that we had from 2010 and then the dual poly solution. We had basically two organizations that were very dominant here. We had Redcard, VisaNet, Cielo, and that this market was then opened. GetNet, and then we had the low-cost machines, Moderninha, and then we also had all the gators of payment, an explosion of products and services, and most recently we had the PEX since 2020 that has provoked an evolution on the market, and also the anti-fraud industry. So we needed to make the industry more sophisticated. I'd like to hear from you. What are your remarks considering this recent evolution? Has anything impacted in the industry So then you had to drastically change the way you work or the way you see the payment market. Juan, I would like to start with you. Well, that's an excellent question because the peak situation undoubtedly it is a revolution. And actually in our industry we have a revolution every 6 months. But we can't leave behind the cryptocurrencies, electronic wallets, and so on, because the industry is increasingly changing. And also the Fundelis market opening. So it is about, well, before time, we had a differentiation. And we had a real competition. The market expanded. So we now have companies specialized in some industry sectors. So we have the consolidation of it. So it's going to be very relevant. An industry that is going to it is not very relevant. And also considering the focus. What is good of the means of payment is that thinking of the future, the strategy for 3 years, we need to redo all the things because PIX, perhaps we are not giving the proper consideration to electronic wallets. Everything that is happening throughout the world is very significant. Half of the world payments are for electronic wallets. And we are moving very fast. So after 20 years working in the sector, it is very important to be very critical, but we should not lose the focus because we need to have a different products on the shelf. And even considering store owners, not everybody needs to have many products on the shelf because the market, we need to understand the market behavior.
And that's hard to integrate. So let's say you, people weren't going to use if you had too much tax, but you have a younger share of the population, and they're going to think it's more relevant. So obviously you have a wide variety of options, but the important thing is to understand what is fitting for them right now for their audience. Well, there are two things that you mentioned I think that are quite relevant. One of them are digital wallets. There is this research that I read on Tunes saying that if you get Generation Z in the US, a large share of this generation will use their digital wallets even, and they don't actually use the traditional model in which you would have access in the previous generation. And you also touched on the specialization, which is quite relevant, right? So the way you see it, how did we experience those transformations? And obviously this has an effect on the anti-fraud services. Well, when we broke this monopoly, it was a reason for the e-commerce in Brazil be what it is today. So on the one hand, you have this pressure in terms of costs from the side of the buyer, and you don't have an innovation driver. So Argentina, for instance, in which they broke the monopoly 2 years ago, and Argentina in 2022 is getting to where we were at 2010. So these innovation drivers, the service providing for the merchant, for the salesperson, not for us who own the credit card. This is what stands out in terms of the e-commerce growing. So you have better approval processes, lesser costs, and you have all this behind the scenes that consumers don't even know what it is about, like financial compensations, reimbursement, deadline for payments, anti-fraud. So the entire payment back office, which has a heavy workload, will be improved when you broke this monopoly. So we are the third or the fourth most expensive supplier in e-commerce. Why is that? Because our product is expensive, is highly specialized, and if you have a product with no anti-fraud, you're gonna go bankrupt. So breaking this monopoly actually opened doors for our country. Wonderful, it's good. You mentioned another example, the Argentinian case, right? And I look back, when I think about that, I think about Mexico. So in Mexico, we still don't have a payment industry that is cashless. It's still cash-based. So recently we got this startup that addressed this POS market, which is cheaper, and they actually became an unicorn. Clip, that's the name. So Clip was the one who were able to carry that out, and they created this movement in which the delay in when it started in Brazil and when it happened there is it's very large. So it started here with PagSeguro. So you have these nuances and there's multiple factors that are involved when you deal with anti-fraud. So how do you see that, Rodrigo? How do you see this transformation? Well, I agree with Tom. In terms of e-commerce, anti-fraud plays a fundamental role. It's mandatory and we can analyze the behavior. So for us who analyze seasons, when it gets to the time of year we're selling for Christmas, the fraud levels rise. So if we don't have an efficient solution for that, both from the perspective of the seller and merchant, and on the other hand, the consumer, because obviously we have two sides. So at times, anti-fraud, we're going to be focusing on one side, and they're going to prevent you from making a sale. And it happens with most merchants. But the most fundamental point in this debate for me, from a consumer perspective, is access. So when you think about payment methods, you're actually thinking about cash, plastic. And when we refer to access, obviously there is the digital account matter, which is favorable for more people to have access to a digital sale, for instance, a digital purchase through e-commerce, like iFood or other player like that. It might seem silly because we're living in this social bubble per se, but it's not silly. So we have a retail operation, we have a counter operation for causa do Bauducco, for instance, for a franchise. And once I was talking to this sales girl, she was a 70-year-old, and her dream was to buy from Shein. She would see influencers talking about Shein. And what does it mean? It means that the digital payment method is going to favor, in a way, this inclusion process, the inclusion of those people in environments that they were not included before. And another data that I would like to highlight here is that cash, paper, is still used by lower classes. And when we see them working at the counter at retail stores, over the last 10 months, the cash flow plummeted by half, actually half. So Pix is already very representative in the daily profits of the stores, but obviously the payment methods, either credit or debit, that carried out by Pix represents more than 80 or 85% of this cash flow. So it's quite important. It's about having access, it's about expansion, and at the end of the day, when we think about the digitalization process, I actually was part of this seminar saying that technology help you dematerialize things. So at the end of the day, this is not going to happen by 2025, but it's going to happen in the short term. So it's to lose the reference of cash as we used to know, as we used to deal with. So a live example was on the holidays in the United States, and some of their stores would only take cash. And some of them do not take cash anymore. So that's a reality, and it's just some hours away from Brazil. If it's happening in the United States, it's going to happen in Brazil as well. It's going to happen in Mexico. It's going to happen in other markets. That's what I had to say. So you mentioned the United States. I recently experienced the same thing. There are loads of places that you cannot pay using cash. Even street artists, they would have like this perch POS so that you can charge £2 per se to help them. Well, that's
De
well put.
inconformados, o mundo está cheio.
We can move forward. So in 2019, I worked for Danone, and I was working with water distributors. So it's an informal market, it's a simple market. And the largest restriction for this digitalization process and to come up with e-commerce business model to provide water, it was basically about the credit and debit card machine. They don't want to pay taxes. They say that these taxes would harm them. And this office was located at Avenida Paulista. And in a 6-month time period, all the popcorn makers had this machine. So they would take pictures, take to the distributors, and they say, if the popcorn maker has one, why don't you want one? Maybe now that they have Pix, this is going to work. So we're overcoming this obstacle. So another thing that I would like to mention is how the pandemic accelerated those trends. The largest decrease in cash use happened during the pandemic. Why is that? Because people were afraid of touching the bills. So it actually accelerates this a lot. And it's good to compare to the United States when we're talking about cash. We're not going to talk about Norway or countries that are far away from our reality. So let's talk about India. So India, let's say bills that are worth less than this are not worth anymore. So now you got to move to digital payments. So people will get in a line to deposit their money. So things could happen organically, or they can happen artificially. It's going to happen in the entire world. I wouldn't say by 2025, but it's unavoidable. The question here is not is it going to happen, but how it's going to take place. So it's also worth remembering that contactless also grew a lot. All of a sudden, it stood out, and we see a lot of institutions asking them to use Apple Pay or Sensor Pay. It's also interesting when you mention the contactless, because for the consumer, it's not that faster in terms of time consumption, because they have to type in their password. It's more about the perception that it's faster. So contactless is a way of preserving volume for credit card usages, because you know that clients were moving elsewhere. So the largest crest for credit card providers is QR code. So the QR code was a threat to that. So again, this works in China, India. So you can see how this really worked. This QR code. So the credit card providers, they wanted to accelerate this perception of the consumer, because the last frontier here is the assistance for this credit card, right? Because cell phones, they always take QR. So today I didn't have a document to ask for the headset because I only use my cell phone. So Rodrigo is going to leave with the headset. Do you want to comment on anything or add anything? So interesting that you mentioned Pix and the way that they reduce counter operations and also using more cashless operations. So at this recent talk that I had with Febraban and people from the central bank, they said that we have more than 1 trillion in transactions using Pix. And where it really stood out is in the usage of cash. So Pix is progressing over cash much more than if you compare a debit card to a credit card. Why? Because you still have a roadmap there, like to have installments using Pix. So you're not sure, right, Tom? You know that credit card providers, they're already well sorted in terms of asking for reimbursements or anything of sorts. Also fidelity, as you know. But more than that, we noticed this progress in which the informal market got into the formal market with using Pix. So you say coconut sales, or people who sell food at traffic signs, right? So strawberries. Okay, Rodrigo, just to comment on what you just mentioned, I'm gonna ask you a specific question. What you have been doing in terms of digital? So you have B Lab, and you have interacted with many startups, right? So how are you addressing those new payment methods and purchase methods within this reality? So recently, if I'm not mistaken, people from Mimo was here as well. So how do you see that? How do you see other formats that they call shop streaming, live commerce? So it has grew and scale and may have an impact on how people see purchases. All right, B Lab is one of our initiatives. I always say that Bauducco is a company of entrepreneurs and innovators and people that have been working here for 70 years or more in the Brazilian market. But we're still an industry. And as a food industry and consumption assets with high profits, we were the last ones to develop in digital terms. So nowadays we talk about B2C, we have our own store, we have many initiatives, we have Casa do Bauducco networks within this framework of B2C. However, we're late when we compare to other industries like the telecom industry or the electronic industry and even retail, a sector of retail. So B Lab was this initiative that in this edition at least, it was focused, and actually my business unit was focused on that. So we broke this record of subscriptions. We got more than 400 startups subscribed. We selected four at least. And one of those was Mimo. Here in Brazil, they have this outline as an innovation startup, but when you move to Asia, their live commerce model is quite divulged and well spread. So it's an experiment within this segment, and we're gonna have those first initiatives. We're going to have those first e-live initiatives taking place in November due to the Black Friday. So we're going through that retail game, trying to innovate and trying to come up with new things. So Mimo is an example to that, and you have a purchasing experience, but we have other important fronts in the backstage or behind the curtain. So, for instance, we had BoxLink, which is a startup focused on logistics, tracking deliveries. Curiously enough, we didn't have any startups in this process of payment methods related to payment and anti-fraud initiatives. But we're paying attention to this B Lab in this edition and focus on the operation side of things and the commercial side as well. And there are other initiatives that are focused on the store experience. So it's a physical experience both for Casa Bauducco, but also at the counter. So we have good expectations in this live commerce incursion of ours. Wow, it's good to see how the market is behaving, but also how important players have been able to find this common ground between digital and physical and new ways of experiences these consumption patterns, the payment methods. All right, just to add on what you just said, I don't want to steal much of your time, but Bauducco, I always like to say that we have this opportunity, even though it's an industry, we have a VIP room within the most important malls in the country. Even though they're separate brands and they have separate portfolios, so it's a different portfolio of what we sell in supermarkets, we still have a chance to connect those consumers because at the end of the day, when you go to a supermarket, you're experiencing a Bauducco moment. When you're walking by the mall, you're experiencing a Bauducco moment as well. So at the end of the day, it's the same consumer. And through technology, through those initiatives, we're able to connect to one another and to provide them with a better experience. All right, Gustavo just arrived. And I'm gonna ask you a question, Gustavo. Before that, can you introduce yourself, please? Of course. First of all, I apologize for the delay. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Gustavo Monteiro. I'm the Senior Vice President of Products at Acoustic, which is a PSP founded in Ecuador, but that works in many countries in Latin America. Before that, I worked for 8, maybe 9 years integrating payment methods, first for Latin America and then for Americas for Netflix. And before that, I was a product manager at Cielo. So basically, I carry out payments my entire life. All right, now that you gave us our background in terms of working with payments in Latin America, the fact that it stands out in terms of acoustic has to do with the fact that you come from Ecuador, and from there you were able to address the entire Latin American region. But we have different nuances in the way that the payment is carried out and how it works in each one of this region. So how do you see those challenges, these local challenges, in trying to integrate payments throughout this region? And what countries do you still face more challenges? And what countries you don't face challenges? So I'm not sure you can mention Brazil or not, because Brazil could be one of the best cases, but I would like to hear from you.
Sure. Well, um, each country has its own peculiarities, but the challenge comes from a very concentrated market. Uh, Only few large players. Usually they are banks that started the means of payment ecosystem from different countries, and then they concentrate the volume and the demand, liquidity in their control. So they were the ones who founded the institutions of countries. So once years went on, the European and American markets, they got bigger and they got new technologies. Some countries were left behind. So answering your question, yes, Brazil is more advanced, and considering other countries in Latin America, it is more competitive. And obviously there is also space to improve, right? But Brazil, what Brazil was in 2010 and today, back and then, it is very remarkable. It's very outstanding. You can see the numbers, right? What we used to have and what we have today. So if you see the other countries in Latin America, they are under this stage. There is one player, two players, one player, a vertical, and processes the issuing institution. So there are different variables for market concentration. But the challenge is to foster technological innovation, having new players for these ecosystems that are more closed. So naturally, the competition brings innovation, right? Yes. Any specific country with latency, even considering adoption, I would say that today, well, it is not a specific acoustic country. A country that has a very challenging scenario is Argentina due to its economic scenario, difficulty of the exchange. If you have any multinational operation and if your country is outside the operating country, they will need to repatriate these that. And the others, I would say that there is no specific challenge because they are very similar. It's a concentrated market, closed, and if you come from abroad, you might have some difficulties to be able to overcome bureaucracy and politics. But comparing 5 years ago, I see more opening in other countries. Chile is more open now, Colombia, Peru, Mexico. Well, anyhow, the effect is very positive and it's going to be long lasting because once you advance in the competition scale, it's very difficult for you to go back. So what has happened in Brazil? We have other big players in other countries besides Brazil. So the competition is coming, and then you will be able to identify new opportunities of more specified areas. So that will bring more commerce, more volume and innovation. Okay, so it's very interesting to hear that it's a macroeconomic thing, and it was mentioned about Argentina, and the local market is trying to find means to fight against that, but then there's an alert from the competitor side, right? So there are some step backs. Technologies move forward. However, there are external events. Well, I would say that payments are about technology, regulations, and legislation. A good player knows how to develop with technology and create a foundation in order to sustain it. Something that's going to be very efficient, not to raise a red flag. So if you're a player that is able to foresee this layer for different types of payment, I think that it is also worth it to have this look. Okay, so as for the Argentina, is it also interesting to keep quick payments? For instance, Mercado Pago, and you make people to want to use the service of these players because the inflation is very aggressive. And we have the Worldpay FIS, and looking globally, you've mentioned about the structure, but the fintech moves the world. Well, I would like to hear from you, considering different markets, what are the trends that you've been following? Is there any insight from any surveys, any polls you've conducted considering consumption behavior and means of payment? And also, for instance, customer profile, what is changing? Well, there are different questions here, and I will try to answer the first one. Well, first of all, as for trends, right in the beginning, there is a very remarkable trend considering digital wallets. I don't like to repeat, but I think that we here in Brazil, we we have this acceleration, this acceleration of means of payment. It is something very aggressive because I'm from the industry, and I also have different means of payment. I can use my credit card or my electronic wallet, and I just need to put my password, and the purchase is done in 30 seconds. But I can use my digital wallet. So it's about the convenience. And back then, these super apps, they were fighting all the electronic wallets in order to be a payment supplier. For instance, food app or ATM, trying to capture the largest share of the consumer because they are fighting in order to have more space, right? So digital wallets, we have good examples of it, and it drastically accelerates the process. As for digital wallets, means of payment, we are about to announce 2025 the preference of payment because before time, when we were providing advice on means of payment, for instance, the public, our population tend to choose credit card or payment slip. But now, today, there is a generation that has a drastically different opinion. So, for instance, if we compare the Z generation, the young folks, online only, online only folks. So this generation, they are doing everything online. The millennials, financial health challenges for seeking for a job during pandemic. So they have been facing different challenges. So the preference of this sector is different. And the credit, everything's turning into digital. And I'm not mentioning about installments. Installments we used to have, but we have an additional type of credit now. And this generation prioritize those stuff, planning of installments, the amount of installments. But if you take into account the old-fashioned generation, there is something towards security, and it's not about the boomers. They feel isolated because this online world they don't know, they are not aware of, and these preferences they were aligned with economic differences. For a company that deals with different generations, we also deal with different kinds of behavior. Because the Z generation, For instance, there's a person who buys something online and the other buys offline. So this complexity, what we can identify, one of the trends that we identify, it is about the customization of the customer experience. Customers, they want their experience to be customized accordingly to their reality. And that brings a complexity to the market, to the retail, because it's a large volume and not everybody is able to deliver everything to other sectors. So these companies, they have a confrontation. So leaving behind a share of the population, then we have competition. And then it will be very hard to retain them. And considering commercial managers, that is very difficult for them because we need to prioritize customers, and it is accelerating. So understanding your customers and what you are expecting, the interaction with the means, online means, has always been very important because it is about the decision. And it's about the convenience, right? And you have other variables considering the user. So as for the specific questions, I would like to ask one specific question to Ton. So you've seen different vulnerabilities on the market. I would like you to comment about some cases, because last time that we were talking, it was a case of fraud. So could you please share with us a little bit of this case or other interesting cases, and what do you see as fraud upfront?
Well, the most common fraud is identity theft. So they clone your credit card or your CPF number, and it's not necessarily the same person. Let's say use the CPF number for the owner of credit card that works. It doesn't work. It works for the invoice, but not in terms of protection. So there is no data validation from the bank saying that this credit card is belonged by this person. That it doesn't work like that. So when we talk about fraud, and what we have been trying to do is to offset this lack of information that the bank that issued has. So you lose data, you lose email, you lose, and now with those apps you can find out what the person is, but they don't. But the issuer and the bank provider, they don't have this information because the same technology back in the 50s. So the APIs, they don't have this information. Obviously, they didn't work with that in the 50s at the United States. So when we develop anti-fraud, we're trying to offset this gap of information. And at the end of the day, the frauder, all they need is a valid credit card and a valid CPF number as well. So a very common one is a guy that will buy many credit cards for $250, $500, and they try to buy airplane tickets, and let's say it doesn't work because the credit card is already canceled. So they lose one of their identity theft. So what do? They try it in an NGO, and if it's approved, then they buy an airplane ticket. That's one of the most common ones, and it's one of those that people don't understand. So they don't know what's going on with them when that happens. And stock ransom, it's quite particular. What do the people do? So people buy using installments. Let's say they purchase two TVs. They just don't p- buy the installments. But you already removed that product from the stock because if they pay it, you have to deliver. All the guy do is not paying the invoice, right? And sometimes competitors do that to hijack stock, which is the weirdest part of it all. So stock hijacking is also common. But all they want is to get the product to resell to keep the money. All right, the stock hijacking. I remember the time that I worked for a submarine when e-commerce was just born. So we didn't have business rules to protect e-commerce against this type of things. So the guy could order 100 items or 100 units of the same item and saying that they would use this installments and then they would basically take out the entire stock. So out of the 100 invoices that were created, just 20 of them were paid. Now they don't use that anymore. Now they're using Pix. Oh, now we're getting close to the end, and I want to look to the future now. So we have been talking a lot about the crypto infrastructure and how that is going to meet the traditional market in a process that many people call convergence. The way you see it, do you think we're going to have that by 2025? With elements like uh, real digital reais? How do you see that? Yes, no, and why? We want to know. Okay. By 2025, I would say no. It's a very short time span for something of this magnitude to take place. Eventually, it's going to happen. So you know that this crypto tax, they'll earn their room because they have value. By 2025, it's too close. The digital real and the digital currencies from the central bank, they have their purpose because they have been programmed for something. So like governmental subsidies or financial loans. So you're able to program, but in the open world, I'm kind of skeptical. Are you able, for instance, to pay a staff member with Bitcoin or tax returns with Bitcoin? I'm not sure it's going to work. So that's my concern. So CVCs are there, they have very particular purposes, and Bitcoin is not a currency made for payment because the transactional cost is super high, but also the time you need to wrap up a transaction is still large. Bitcoin is basically an investment tool nowadays, more than a transactional tool, because any time of currency that fluctuates 90% this way or the other way, you cannot trust it, basically. So I don't actually agree with you because obviously those transactions are going on, and we have so many wallets that will give you a credit card for you to spend, and then they're gonna debit that from a crypto stock. A direct transaction for crypto, no, but I wouldn't say it's that far. It's something that it's under development. So I agree with Gustavo that Bitcoin is not a currency thought to be transactional. There are some currencies that have more potential to that end, but the crypto market has works with more than $30 trillion. So obviously people would like to use that at some point. It's not like credit cards. It's not like gold either. So at some point you're gonna use it. So the $1 million question here is not if by 2025 we're gonna be using it. The question is it gonna be relevant enough by 2025? I think it's too early, but I think it's gonna happen. Okay, very good point. All right, when we think in the 2 to 3 years time span, I think we have two drivers working there. Either as a consumer or as a salesperson, as a retail store or whatever. On the one hand, you have the easy to use factor, and the other one is safety. These two forces are going to drive the market in the short term. But on the other hand, if we talked about cryptocurrency 3 years ago, not many people would raise their hands saying that they know cryptocurrencies, right? So maybe you're right. There will, maybe we'll be surprised. But more than cryptocurrencies, the way I see it, what's gonna last or be valid is, if we think about that, one of the leverages here is security. The mindset of blockchain, not necessarily as it works today, but its mindset might be a pathway to mitigate fraud risks. I'm not sure, but this is the way I see it. And the fact that digital wallets are easy, it's also going to become a reality. Obviously, there is the user experience, which is quite relevant. Now, I'm going to get to the end of this panel. I'd like to thank you all for your opinions and this chit chat, and for you who are listening to the panel. Thank you.